had a hump. It was pretty early on, and I also brought this up to the doctor. I was like, this is not the normal curvature, and the scoliosis, the S1, was also there, so it was different. And because it was a small baby, these were very visible. They were very loud. By the end of the 3rd month, everything seems to have shut down. I remember I went to the ER right about that 3rd month, and I saw a doctor. And I explained all these things now, everything, with grave concern. And the only thing they ordered was do deep suctioning. And I kept asking, why are you doing this? Good humans! Alrighty, today is the day we are going to get into the journey to spinal muscular atrophy. Welcome, welcome. Merry Christmas to you all. I hope everybody is having a good weekend so far. We are here at home. So today we're going to start on the journey to the diagnosis of spinal muscular atrophy. My son is wheeling around with his power chair, so if you hear any zooming, that's my son. So, I'm going to get right into it so that we can get, hopefully we can get through this. I'm not very sure how long this will go, but I'm going to do as best as I can to shrink it so that it's not so elaborate. So, 2016, people make resolutions. For some reason that year, I had asked God to give me more patience. Be careful what you ask for, because I think God just decided, I have got just the right person to introduce patience, and you will grow in leaps and bounds in patience. So I got pregnant in 2016 February, and my pregnancy was not a difficult pregnancy, I like to say. It was just, usual first trimester, usual problems of the first trimester, nausea, vomiting. I like fruits, and I got through that with nectarines. I love nectarines. They were tart enough to take that away. Second trimester, I didn't have any issues in the second trimester, but toward the end of the second trimester into the 3rd trimester, I had a time where my heart rate was irregular, and it wasn't irregular to cause problems, but it was irregular enough to be high in the 160s for me to get a monitor recording for overnight recording. And after they reviewed it, it didn't show anything that needed any treatment, and anyone was pregnant, so they were not going to do much, but at least it gave a baseline. So that was first trimester, second trimester, 3rd trimester, okay? And so one evening, I had worked night shift. I worked night shift to the last day. I worked 39 weeks. This was the 4th day, now heading into 40 weeks. Now, I had worked night shift, and so I was sleeping, and I had rested the whole day before, so this is now into Sunday morning, and my water broke. And so I headed right into the hospital. And initially, my plan was to give birth normally, but they ended up trying to induce me. It didn't work too well because my blood pressure was very low. Now, in between the journey before the gestation time, I was going to prenatal clinic. I enjoyed this clinic particularly because we were a group of us who were first-time parents, and everybody came with their partner, and you sat down and reviewed the journey as you went. And they started early, and we went all the way into the pregnancy, all the way to the end. And they would try and schedule you around about the same time if you were going to go into the hospital. So we went to the hospital tours together, all those things. And so anyway, the day came and I went to the hospital. So this would now be 13th of November 2016. So I went into hospital, and after they tried to induce and it failed, I labored through that induction, being halfway induced, halfway not induced. And I gave birth to Nathan, I believe it was about 4 p.m. on a Sunday evening. It was a normal birth. I didn't have any episiotomy. It was pretty straightforward. Gave birth to the child. He cried normal. He had a normal APGAR score. There was not, APGAR score is the score that they give when a child is born. There was nothing that said anything that was problematic. So after I gave birth, since it was a very, seemingly non-complicated delivery, everything was completed and we went home the following day. So that would be now a Monday. And because of the good care they had taken of when we were pregnant, we had been told what position the child should sleep in, what they should eat, all these beautiful things. So I went home, but they used to encourage children to be, you let the child sleep on the back. And you don't use any covers, no pillows or anything like that for safety. But every time I tried to put Nathan on his back, he had this constant gaggle, like a constant gaggle. It was just never ending. And he had so many secretions. Now, at this point, the mother in me, I'm a new parent, I have so many things going on. With just being a first-time parent, you're a new parent, you've just left the hospital and come home. And so I'm trying to figure out how to adjust into all this. But my son needs me. So I was breastfeeding. I immediately had milk very early because after I gave birth, I insisted on breastfeeding early. So by the time I left the hospital, I had adequate milk. So this noise just wouldn't go away. So very early on, I would lie him on the side. He was a side sleeper, and so I would position him on the side, and then we'd turn to this other side. And when we breastfeed, I'd put him on the other side. He breastfed very well, and he initially he was a small baby. He was 2.5 kilograms. That's 5 pounds, 5 point something pounds. At least in this country, that's a small baby. And I was also an elderly primary gravity, someone who's giving birth for the first time. I was in my 34, 35 thereabout. So because he was a small baby, I had to go for weigh-ins. I think it was weekly. I had to go in for weigh-ins, and that, so that they would see that there's a trend that he's gaining weight, and then when he got to a certain amount, I think it was either 6 or 7 pounds, then that the weekly weigh-ins would drop off. So I had given birth, I had gone home. I am seeing the doctor very, very, very frequently. He's breastfeeding well, but there is this constant secretion gaggle at the throat. It was not ending. Now, my ICU nurse bells were ringing. There's something wrong with, you shouldn't have that gaggle of secretions. And it was a lot of, you can feel they were stuck in there. Lots of things, lots of secretions. So what I started doing is I'd close the shower door, turn on the shower, and it would be very steamy. And then I'd go there and hold Nathan, and that steam would kind of liquefy the mucus, and I'd pull that mucus with a small, that small bulb. That's what I used to use in the nose and in the mouth. So that was the first thing. And then his chest had a different shape. It had you know, like when you're breathing in very hard, your ribs, the muscles go in between your ribs, but his rib cage was different. Aside just being very shrunken and very small, his rib cage had a different shape, like like depressions. It had depressions. It was just different, and I kept thinking, this is just not the normal chest, or did his lungs not develop fully? But I gave birth to him at term, so his lungs developed well, but the chest shape was just different. And since I was seeing the doctors every week, I kept bringing up these things. So the chest shape was different. And then his spine curve, he had very early onset kyphosis. You know, the small of the back had a hump. It was pretty early on, and I also brought this up to the doctor. I was like, this is not the normal curvature, and the scoliosis, the S1, was also there, so it was different. And because he was a small baby, these were very visible. They were very loud. But the doctors didn't think there was anything to worry about. They just said, just continue on. So I continued on. I kept breastfeeding my baby. He had a lot of colic and a lot of gas retention. Like I know children have colic, but this was way too early, I thought, for him to be having colic. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a little too early for colic, isn't it? But he had a lot of colic and a lot of gas. And so I used to buy in the store, the same company that makes nose free, that there's a small tube also you can insert in the rectum, and it releases air rapidly. And that's what I used to do initially, and that helped, because then he'd be able to breastfeed more without worrying about the coliciness. It was too much. It was a little much. So that was the other thing. And then Nathan loved water. You know, like really, really, really enjoyed showers or baths. In the bath, he loved water. What I didn't know then is, you know, in water, there's no spinal musculature, there's no gravity. So he enjoyed the buoyancy of the water. And then the other thing was, aside the constant rattle, his breathing was different. His chest would go in, his stomach would come out. His chest would go in. They call it paradoxical breathing, where you're doing the opposite. And it was very pronounced. With small activities, you would notice it, the different breathing. I remember thinking, this is not normal. But again, because I was seeing the doctors frequently, I brought it up. And I don't know if they took note of it, but I left with no answer. And then the breathing, and then at the back, the breathing, the chest, the breastfeeding was okay so far. In hindsight, I should have noted that in the third trimester, now that I think of it, the third trimester, he never played as much in the womb. But it was confusing because I worked night shift, and so he would be active at night and would sleep in the day. So when I went for clinic in the day, he was sleeping, because then I would go to work and he'd be active. But I remember at some point late thinking, I haven't had my baby playing. And I'd take orange juice and then he'd play some. And then much later I'd go on and I'd think, I haven't had him moving so much. And then I'd do the same, get a boost of sugar, and he'd play more. I never quite thought of it. But I do remember every time we went to the clinic, he wasn't moving as much. But then we and the doctor's team knew I worked night shift, because I used to leave those meetings and go to work. And so that was hindsight. It was an alarm that there was something not right, okay? And then the breathing was different, the spine was different, the abdomen was different, the chest was different. His breathing, aside the gaggle, was, aside being the breathing, the stomach being up and down, he also had it was like I don't know if to say it's labored breathing, but his breathing wasn't at baseline. It wasn't smooth breathing. It wasn't just breathe in, breathe out. Aside the secretions and the abdomen, it was just different. He had nasal flaring very early, and those are not signs of infection at that time. I mean, I remember reading all these things and thinking there's something off. And then, you know, when you're changing a child a diaper and, you know, the legs are up, the hands are up, and they're doing all these things. My son's legs never did that. His hands initially were strong, but his legs were always on the bed, and he had them in the frog position. And I remember bringing this up with the doctors. I saw those doctors frequently, at least every week, and I always kept a list of these things. And every week I'd go, they'd say the same thing. Now, to compound all these concerns, I also went, now when I saw the primary care providers are not, you know, dialing into what I'm saying, and the secretion management was becoming worse and worse. At this point, he was still breastfeeding. I went to the ER, an emergency room, and it was a children's emergency room, and I went to that ER very frequently, very, very frequently, like almost every other day. And almost every other day, I'd meet a different doctor, of course. I'd explain my concerns, and they'd come in, do the examination. I'd give this list of the things that I've given you, and nobody would say anything is wrong. I think being a first-time mother is also challenging, and also being someone in healthcare, because they think you're just being a pain in the behind. But I knew there was just something wrong. So I went to the ER frequently. But at some point, when I went to the ER, they started doing like deep suctioning. I'd go in, they'd put in a catheter through the nose, they'd suction the secretions, lots of them, and then they'd send me home. And I kept asking, is it not abnormal to be needing this suctioning for this baby? And I couldn't get anybody to listen to me. He had you know the way children have a very forceful cry, like a very oomph cry, loud. It wasn't Nathan. Nathan was his cry was very soft. It wasn't strong. It was a very soft cry. Almost like he doesn't have, like he's, you know, when you're losing your voice, it wasn't a strong cry. It was a very, very soft cry. And then his breastfeeding, he never tolerated, you know, the way you hold your baby here, on the front to breastfeed. He never tolerated that. He always tolerated the football hold where he'd fall under my arm, and that was because he would be more on his side, and he would have support, better support, but he never tolerated the usual hold for breastfeeding. But then this one he did, and I'd be able to support his whole spine, and then his legs would be well tucked in. So those were things, I don't know if it should have been that way, but I kept thinking to myself, he's not doing well with this position here. His neck keeps crunching, and he has very many secretion control problems. But when I put him in this football hold, it kind of opened up his airway, and he'd be able to breathe better. But I kept bringing this up. So those were very many red flags that I had, right? Chest had a different shape. His breathing had a different shape. Secretion control was different. And then the difference in breathing, the spine. I mean, I had all these many red flags, but he didn't listen. So I remember changing from our initial doctor after we were done with the time when he had gained enough pounds. He was breastfeeding well still. I had no issues with him breastfeeding, but the secretion control kept getting worse. So I changed pediatricians that early. I moved from one, went to another one. And so I started the same thing again. And this clinic was a little different because they allowed you to walk in the morning. They had a slot like 7 to 9 or 7 to 10 where you would walk in if you are a patient of theirs, you can walk in and they'll find a provider. It was a group of providers, and they would find a provider to see your child, even if you didn't have an appointment. So I went in on those mornings. I went in quite a bit on those mornings, quite a bit, very many of them. And aside the chest and those other problems, my main concern was secretions. At this point, maybe now this is month 2-ish where I'm changing this doctor, secretion control was really problematic. I mean, I could hear the whole airway had lots of junk and gunk in the chest. I could hear it all the way here, and I'd do the steaming and pull out with the bulb, but I'd have to do that steaming thrice in the day, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, and then in the night somewhere in between I'd have to do the steaming. It was easy then because I was still breastfeeding, so I was up for those times. But the secretion control, I kept going to see the doctors and bringing this up. There's something not right, and they just either didn't pick it up or didn't believe me because he didn't sound bad. They always said his airway, his chest was clear, but it wasn't. There was just so much rattles and gunk in there. And the last in me, the red flag, I was, you can feel the bells, the alarm bells. Something is wrong and I don't know what is wrong. And then towards the end of month 2, starting month 3, now things started going on. The one and the most I remember noticeably was, when you hold the child here and they're lying on your shoulder, my son's neck would start falling back. I remember thinking, and it happened a couple of times, sometimes you hold a baby and you can be able to multitask, but I remember holding him and putting him here, and his neck would fall back, or it wasn't right. And it continually got worse that when I held him, his whole back would lean back. And I remember thinking, there's something not right. Something is not right. And then his legs got progressively very, very, very weak. I mean, you'd hold and it would drop. And then the hands got weaker and weaker. As the child gets older, towards month 3, they should be able to, at least breastfeed and sleep X amount of time in the night before they can wake up for the next feed. With Nathan, this kept getting worse. He needed more feeds more frequently. He wasn't able to pull enough breast milk to satiate the hunger he was having. The muscles were failing. And so he started losing weight. And I remember noticing he's needing small frequent feedings because he's getting tired of pulling, and the little he's pulling is not enough to keep him not hungry. So I kept having to breastfeed so frequently, like every hour I'm back, or even every half an hour he wants more milk. It wasn't making sense. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't get anybody to listen. And then the secretion control, it just got worse and worse. And there was just a constant, whether he's on the side or on the back or whatever position, it was just constant gaggle. In the day, his breathing was okay, even though it was the chest in, stomach out. But in the night, towards now month 3 there, his breathing in the night was, shallow. Like, it's not he's not taking like a full breath. It's very shallow breathing, and he'd take long pauses in the breathing, like long enough for me to need to tap him to get him going. And it got worse and worse. By the end of the 3rd month, everything seems to have shut down. I remember I went to the ER right about that 3rd month, and I saw a doctor, and I explained all these things now, everything, with grave concern. And the only thing they ordered was do deep suctioning And I kept asking, why are you doing deep suctioning? This is not normal for a child this age to need deep suctioning enough for them to go all the way from the nose all the way down to pull out lots of, lots. And then after that visit, I went back home with him. And at this time, it was also a time when I had to go back to work. So I was leaving him with a nanny. And when I left him with the lady that I left him with, it was an in-home nanny. In the evening when I picked him up, she told me he hasn't fed. He's not able to feed. And have a doctor check him, was all she said. Have a doctor check him. There's just something I can't put a finger to it. This was an older lady. So I took my baby home. I went with him because I had left work. The milk flow was heavy, so he didn't have to work to pull. It just flowed in and he drank. But this particular night, he struggled with sleeping. He wasn't breathing. Secretion control was really gargly, really noisy. He had very shallow breaths. He had long pauses in between the breathing. It was a long night, a very, very, very long night. So in the morning, I woke up, I called out of work, I packed things, and I decided today I'm going to that clinic. I was the first person. They hadn't actually opened. They used to open at 7 a.m. I was there at 6:45, ready and packed. As soon as they opened and they were ready, I walked in. And this day I had resolved, I am not going to leave this clinic until I get answers. So I walked into the